Alderman Tindem. Here. Alderman Grover. Here. Alderman Rainey. Here. Alderman Burris. Alderman Fisk.
Here.
Alderman Nguyen. Alderman Wilson.
Here.
8-0.
We have a quorum. Alderman Jean-Baptiste is in Washington, D.C., I believe, at the White House.
He's visiting Barack.
I, Elizabeth B. Tisdall, Mayor of the City of Evanston, pursuant to Council Rule 16.3, call for a special meeting of the Evanston City Council on Monday, May 17, 2010, at 7:30 p.m. in the Council Chambers at the Evanston Civic Center, 2100 Ridge, for the purpose set forth below, public comment and capital improvement program presentation. The citizens signed up to speak are Junad Rizki, Jean Lindwall, and Carl Bova. If you would come up and speak in that order, and please give your name and address.
Good evening, Junad Rizki. Having watched some of these meetings over the years, one of the things that's concerned me, and maybe whether it's a great concern now or is really how some of these things have been staffed and which departments do the work, and how really different departments are working. Recently, I noticed two of the licensed architects on staff are no longer here. One was let go and one left for other opportunities. And really I'm wondering how some of these projects are going to be executed as we go off into the future. I know these are hard times for the city, but if we're hiring lobbyists and things and hiring employees to lobby and don't have professional staff to run some of these jobs, I have concerns. And also, given the small amount of capital the city has, is this capital going to be used well to get things done? And it's been my position as I've seen things here over the years that too much money seems to get wasted. Things are not getting done. While this is a budget that you're presenting tonight, I'd like to know really what has not been done in the past and what's not really been completed and what money is still in other funds that really hasn't been used. And where are these projects ending? Where are last year's projects done? And now that we're having new projects this year. And where's that money and what happened to it and were these projects successfully executed? These are the kind of things that I would have concerns about, given we have so little money and we're going to be raising taxes. And we all know that. And every penny is going to hurt the citizens. So, good evening.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Jean Lindwall, 625 Library Place. I just have 3 quick points I'd like to make. First of all, I want to remind you all, as you're considering the capital improvement program, that with respect to a bond sale that's unabated, involves unabated general obligation debt, that is a property tax increase, and it'll appear on everyone's tax bills to the extent that the dollars associated with the bond levy exceed the bonded indebtedness that's going to be retired this year. So just because you didn't increase the general fund budget or it didn't involve a property tax increase for that, doesn't mean that the capital improvement bond projects won't. The second thing I'd like you to think about is whether or not Evanston is better off moving to include some sort of a capital maintenance fund that is included in the general fund budget every year to fund some of the smaller projects and avoid bond interest costs. For example, why should we be selling bonds with the associated interest to transfer so that you can transfer $300,000 to the general fund every year in order to pay for administrative costs? That just seems a little like charging your groceries on the credit card and then paying interest paying them off over the course of a year. Finally, the final point that I'd like to suggest that you explore is whether or not some, in particular, park and street resurfacing projects could be deferred. We have MFT funds that pay for a significant amount of street resurfacing every year, but in recent years, street resurfacing has also been included in the general obligation bond program, presumably to catch up on backlog of need. When the capital improvement program was initially started several decades ago, one of the reasons was, and one of the reasons for the initial bond sale was so that 10 years worth of park improvements can be compressed into a 3-year period. So the question is really, how are we doing? Are we catching up on the maintenance backlog, and is it now possible to defer some of the street resurfacing for a year or two until the economy improves? So those are the things that I hope that you will think about and consider. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carl Bova, 1322 Rosalie Street. Good evening, Madam Mayor and the members of the City Council. I remember a few years ago Alderman Drummer asking then Finance Director Bill Stafford just how much a long-term debt project would cost the citizens of Evanston. I ask each of you to do the same this evening. Is that cost worth it? Let this guide you in your discussion. Are each of the projects under consideration good investments? Does revenue get generated as a result of the implementation of a project for which long-term debt is the funding source? If so, such projects are a bit more attractive, but are they affordable and necessary? Have you been able to figure out whether the individual projects have a life cycle that exceeds the term of the debt? The greater the life cycle, the greater the priority and attractiveness. Of course, assuming the project is needed to begin with. We seem to have too many top priority projects. Someone needs to pass a higher degree of judgment on the merits of the projects. Yeah, one needs to pass judgment between different departments that are asking for their projects to be funded over others. When is the total debt load enough? Is a city mortgage of $200 million a good ceiling? Even low interest or no cost debt must be paid off and figures into our overall ability to absorb the debt burden each year. I noticed that the CIP includes grant-funded or TIF-funded projects, which is a good thing when there are no long-term strings attached. But sometimes there are strings. Think about how much it will cost the citizens to repair the dilapidated 15-year-old downtown pavers funded with TIF money. Or what about the city's future obligation to pay for the development of any yellow line infill stations? Just as Jean indicated, nor should we be using GO debt for annual program funding, such as roads or sidewalks. And although I'm an engineer, I do not believe that engineering studies should be funded through GO debt for the same reason. It is not necessarily a long-term life cycle. I ask you to take your time and judge each project as if you had to spend your last dimes on the best of the bunch, and consider pay-as-you-go, just as Alderman Drummer did years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes citizen comment. City Manager.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, good evening. Thank you for convening tonight to discuss the capital budget. As you recall, This was an unfinished item as part of the adoption of the operating budget back in February. As we promised in February, we would come back to talk more specifically about projects that we believe are critical for the current year, as well as to help us set priorities as we move forward in coming years. Our Director of Administrative Services, Joe Allen Daly, and our Assistant City Manager, Marty Lyons, have presentations that they would like to make, and I believe we're going to start with Ms. Daly.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, Manager Bob Kowitz, Clerk Green. I'm here this evening to give you a brief overview of what we're going to talk about, and then I'm going to turn the microphone over to Stephen Drasner, the Finance Division Manager, who will make a presentation regarding the specifics of the Capital Improvement Plan. On Friday, we sent you some information, hard copies and via electronic copy, a map of the city with the wards delineated. We attempted to put as many projects on there. We indicated in the material that was sent to you that some of the projects that are ongoing, such as sidewalk, construction, reconstruction, some of the road projects were not on the map. But we did attempt to delineate as much as we could for you. We do have a representative from our GIS department of IT, Mark Varner, who is here as well, who can show things graphically after Stephen's presentation. So we were able to send you a map. We were able to send you something indicating how the priorities were set, and it is a little bit of a different format. We also gave you specific information with regard to each project in the capital improvements plan. We referenced the pages for you, and we did include information with regard to the 5-year plan so you could see the funding that may be needed in subsequent years. When I turn it over to Steve in his PowerPoint, he's going to talk about the Priority 1 projects that are in your materials and the funding source that goes along with each of those projects. He'll briefly discuss the projects, and he'll highlight for you which of those projects are proposed to be funded by general obligation debt, as well as those projects that will be funded through reserves or through other sources. Next, he'll move into the projects that have been highlighted as Priority 2 and 3, talk about those briefly, and then he'll end his presentation with questions and leave some discussion points for you with regard to whether or not you want to change the priorities of any of the projects and talk further with regard to those, as well as how you would like to proceed. Again, as I indicated, we do have a representative from GIS here who can also show things to you graphically in a Google Earth format. And the department heads are here as well to help answer any specific questions you have regarding any of the projects, any of the time frames to start the projects, to complete the projects. And as the city manager indicated, the assistant city manager is here as well to talk about some of the history. So with that, I'll turn it over to Stephen Drasner for the PowerPoint presentation.
Can we shut the lights? Good evening, City Council, Mayor Tisdale. It's a pleasure to be here. We're going to go through the capital improvement plan. This is a follow-up meeting from last February. Unfortunately, we didn't really have the time to devote to this subject due to other issues during the budget season. So, if you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to ask. You don't have to wait until I'm done with the presentation. You can just ask your questions at any time. Okay, back in February, we tried to categorize the various CIP projects using these 4 criteria. I'll just read them briefly. Was the project already funded or in progress at the beginning of the fiscal year, which was March 1st, 2010? Was the project funded by revenues other than general obligation bonds? Was the project critical to the success of other projects or operations? And finally, was the project part of an annual maintenance plan, which if we deferred would result in higher costs to the city in the future. So those were the 4 criteria that we used when we prioritized. Okay, now there's a lot of projects on some of these slides. I'm not going to read through all the slides, but if you have any questions regarding specific projects that are listed here, feel free to ask. Okay, the first couple of slides list...
Excuse me, Steve. Alderman Rainey has a question.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty projects, why don't you go down the list on page 2 and explain, give us some definition for words such as CIP reserves. Is that cash? Is that money left over? Geodebt, unabated. What does unabated mean? Non-general fund revenues and abated geodebt. What does abated mean? Those kinds of things, so that as we go along, people will know what we're all talking about.
Sure, it's a good suggestion. Geodebt is general obligation debt that the city issues usually through a bond issuance. That's a general obligation of the city, so the city backs up those bonds through all its various revenue sources. The city is guaranteeing payment of those bonds. The difference between general obligation abated versus non-abated debt is the abated debt it's still a bond that was issued, but another fund is paying for those bonds. For instance, the parking fund or the water sewer funds. So those are usually funded through revenues of those type of funds. It's not included in the general tax levy, so it's not actually the general taxpayers are not funding the principal and interest payments on those bonds. CIP reserves, that's for the most part, that's money that's in the CIP fund that was not used from prior bond issues. So that's remaining funding that we're trying to use up before we issue any new bonds.
Are we still paying debt service on those bonds?
Yeah, most of them are 20-year bonds.
So on the tax bill for $3,500,000, it's about $350,000 in debt service?
Yeah, well, typically I figure it's 7 to 8% of the total amount that's issued. So if we issue $1 million in bonds, principal and interest combined at the current rates would be about $70,000 to $80,000 a year.
And that's because the interest rate is less now than
right, yeah, as
was?
interest rates start increasing in the future, and they most likely will, that 7 or 8% will probably start climbing.
Okay. So that shouldn't be disregarded as not being on the tax bill. It's going to be under debt service, general obligation.
Oh, right, the unabated
service.
bonds do show up on the tax bill, right.
And what will the $8,252,243 unabated geodebt look like?
Well, if we were to issue the full amount that was adopted last February, I would estimate that if we issue about $9 million in debt, probably $700,000 to $800,000 a year in principal and interest payments.
So that, and plus the CIP reserves.
Well, the CIP
That's
reserves
still being paid for.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So the next couple of slides list all the Priority 1 projects. These were the projects that were actually adopted last February for the current fiscal year. The total of all these projects equal about $34 million. And again, I'm not going to go through all the projects, but you can see the different funding sources. Some of these are funded through the CDBG fund, some through our capital improvement fund, some are funded through some enterprise funds like the water or sewer, the special assessment fund, that's what the SA stands for, the fifth from the top. So the capital improvement plan as a whole is funded through many different sources. And that shouldn't be confused with the Capital Improvement Fund, which is one fund that the city has, and that's usually for just general obligation bonds, unabated general obligation debt. Okay. The next slide here, this is just the GO portion of the debt. So this is what we would actually, if we were to fund all the projects that were adopted, we would issue approximately $8.3 million in total general obligation debt, and this is what would actually flow through on the tax bills. You can see that most of these are listed as bonds, but the last one for various network equipment, we classified that as a loan because the useful life of those assets would be, they wouldn't be 20-year assets. They would probably maybe 3 to 5 years. So we try to match the maturity of the debt as closely as possible with the useful life of the asset that we're purchasing with that debt. Okay, the next few slides are just showing you by category the non-general obligation debt sources. So the first section there are the CIP reserves, and that would be the prior bond issues from previous years that we're trying to use up. The next section is our E911 fund, and they want to buy some new equipment. That's the majority of the $1.6 million. 1.2 out of the 1.6 is for furniture and equipment for the E911 center. Okay, I'm going to skip over some of the smaller amounts. The fleet fund, again, this is paid out of the fleet fund. It's not paid out of our CIP fund. It's $1.7 million. And historically, this is a little bit less than what we normally allocate to that fund. Okay, the next section, approximately $4.3 million are from various grants. And finally, we have some IEPA debt of almost $4.8 million.
What's IEPA?
That stands for Illinois Environmental Protection Agency debt. And those are usually very low, either zero interest or very low interest loans that we wouldn't be able to get from a bank or from issuing bonds. Okay, and finally, we have some motor fuel revenues that help fund various street projects, street resurfacing projects. And we have water. Yes.
Sorry, Alderman Rainey.
Can you tell us, Steve, how we get motor fuel tax revenue?
Yeah, that's a state distributed tax. We get it on a monthly basis. And
How? I mean, what's the basis for getting a certain
it's on a per capita basis. The exact percentage I don't know offhand, but it is a per capita tax.
Does it have anything to do with the number of gas stations or how much gas you
No,
sell?
that has nothing to do with. We have our own local tax where we get that kind of revenue, but that has nothing to do with the MFT tax.
And does that revenue, the Evanston gas tax, does that go into the general fund or into road improvement?
No, our local tax goes into the general fund.
Thank you.
Alderman Grover.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have 2 questions. Do you want me to ask?
Certainly.
First one is as to those projects for which the city is receiving grant money, does the city have a corresponding match responsibility, and what would that amount be?
Every grant is a little bit different. Sometimes the grant funds 100% of the project. Other times it's a 50-50 match. Sometimes it could be 75-25. Every grant is different. I can't really generalize for all those grants. I don't have that information with me right now. That's something I can always provide you, but I just don't have it handy at this time to give you specifics on the matching of the grants.
Page 7 has some of the answers. The yellow line.
Do they correspond?
Well, if you
It's
look at
just-
yellow
yeah.
line, it's 55, and then this is,
Okay.
you can-
If there were a way to better understand what the city's match would be for those things that have a grant.
In some of the detail, the CIP detail that we gave you in the PDF document, that might give you more information on the matching, the grant matching. I just don't have it in front of me.
Alderman Tendem and I had a question about on page 9, the Sheridan Isabella Joint with Wilmette project, which I think we both understood was
a grant from the state awarded to both Wilmette and Evanston.
for the street resurfacing there.
Correct. It's listed as a motor fuel tax revenue.
130,000.
Correct.
Okay. I'm not sure why that's the case, unless if it's the actual project is being funded through the MFT fund. So it was just categorized in general as MFT revenues.
Paul Schneider, city engineer. Alderman Grover, that particular grant, Alderman Tendem as well, sorry. There is a local matching share with that particular grant, and while the state and federal share paid for the Lions portions of the project, there was still a local match involved with that project.
And that would be 130,000?
Actually, it's turning out to be, I don't have the final number on it yet, but I think it's going to turn out to be just slightly higher than that.
Thank you.
Okay, this slide summarizes the previous slides, and this just shows you the subtotal by category for non-general obligation debt. So you can see the largest funding source is actually coming from our water fund, and the IEPA, some of that is for water, some is for sewer. There's actually a breakdown, I think, at a later slide. But you can see the vast majority of the $25 million is the water, the IEPA, and the reserves, and also the grants. Now I'm going to just talk about some of the top projects by department. For facilities management, and if you just to let you know, if you have any project-specific questions, it's probably best that we call up the person in charge of the project, and they can probably better answer your questions rather than me. So if you have any questions, just let us know. Okay. As everyone knows, that we're going to put a new roof on the Civic Center. That's going to be about $1.7 million. The police headquarters parapet walls, about $570,000. A firing range, $460,000. Civic Center, just general renovation work for about $300,000. And the Fleetwood gym roof for $193,000. Those are the top projects for facilities. For our IT division, we have 2 more payments on our Excella software lease, so we're going to have one more after this for another $250,000. And the rest of the money we allocated to IT is really just for general equipment, servers, network, and other systems. This also includes the phones. That falls under this category as well.
Alderman Rainey.
I'd just like to know the reasoning behind a lease being paid for with GO bonds. I just
it's mostly due to the amount of the lease.
But that's not why it should be. I mean, the amount. I thought we used general obligation bonds for capital improvements that have a lifetime of a certain
right. Well, I'm not sure
term.
what the life expectancy of this particular software is going to be. Hopefully, for the amount of money we're spending, we'll get at least 10 years out of it.
Somebody needs to explain the Acela software lease to me.
Yes, Madam Mayor, Alderman Rainey, we'll let Mr. Lyons, I think, probably pick up on the last part of that the initial question, and then Mr. Sloan is here as well to speak about the lease.
The last part of the question, what we are proposing this year is to not do long-term GO debt for our capital needs for technology. We're proposing a short-term installment loan. we would prefer to do pay-as-you-go. Unfortunately, that our current revenue situation is not such that we can do that. So we could do that. It would mean further cuts in operations, and this has been something that has been in the capital improvements plan with the city for many years. It was actually used as a means to spool up money. When I first came to the city, there was approximately $1.6 million in reserves, in the reserve funds, for capital technology plans. And no revenue source, all came from bonds issued over time so that we could then do a major project. And this last year, we took all of those funds and spent them down, not necessarily on those technology projects, but on long-term capital projects with a 20-year life or more. And then just to answer the Excella question, the Excella question when the project was brought to the council 3 to 4 years ago was a $1.6 million project that was brought forward with a multi-year lease payment option to cover the costs through the capital improvements fund, not through general operating funds. So a little bit different situation. We put in the budget just by way of the change that we're proposing this year. We're looking at another software purchase in the coming year that will be totally paid for within the general fund. If there's going to be a lease, it will be an operating lease. It will not be something paid for out of any borrowing at all. So if we can't afford it in our own operating dollars, then we can't afford it.
What is Excella?
Excella is the PAL project, so that is our permit system that is used mainly by building and planning, but also by health and one other department, and I'm just drawing a blank, and also Public Works.
Alderman Wilson.
Wait.
Oh, sorry.
I have no idea what the answer to my question was. I want to understand I know what Excella is. I know what the software is. I want to know what is the lease. Is it a term?
Yes.
Is it something we pay for and we really then own the software? Is it a license fee?
No, it is it was a bundle of all of the things you just said, and we will our fees will drop down substantially into just a maintenance fee, but we did a lease purchase of the software.
Okay, how many installments have we paid, and what's the total cost of the lease?
The original purchase price, it is my understanding, is $1.6 million.
And when have we always made $250,000 payments?
No, it's actually been in previous years. It was a higher amount, and we can get you the full payment stream as a follow-up.
And we've always paid it out of the capital plan, the CIP plan.
I can say with surety over the last 3 years.
We've always bonded for this money.
We did not since I've been here. We paid for it was previous bonds, so yes, Alderman.
We have bonded for this money.
And Alderman
there's
Rainey.
one more payment?
After 10/11. So in the year 2011, we'll have one more payment.
And then what will we have? After we've paid $1.6 million, what will we have?
We will have a multi-department permitting system that we own and just need to pay maintenance fees for that system.
Alderman Rainey, does that answer your question?
I'm thinking. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Alderman Wilson.
I didn't see a breakdown like this in my materials, but do we have a separation for the items? A lot of these projects are projects that are completed and we're simply waiting to get the bill, right? An invoice is going to come, we're going to have to pay that.
You're talking about,
generally speaking, out of all of the not just this category, but out of all the categories.
right? Well, anything over $20,000 has to be approved by council, so you have complete control over.
No. Well, I mean, what I'm asking is, some of these projects are finished, the work's done, and we're waiting to get an invoice for it and write the check, right?
Right. I don't know.
No.
This.
No. I mean, this is a, as Mr. Lyons indicated, the way the funding has been set up for the information technology piece is something that we are completing with this particular lease. Most of the projects, if not all of the projects, either have not begun or are only in the initial phases of starting in the current year. This is the non-standard piece, and as Mr. Lyons has said, we are moving away from doing this with information technology purchases in the future.
It doesn't answer my question. Out of everything on the capital improvement budget plan, all $34 million, some of the work is done, right?
Most of it is in progress or is now just in the first stages of being started. I don't know that there's anything specifically that's absolutely completed.
Well, I think there may be a handful at least.
I would say there could be or will be a handful, but the vast majority either have not been completed or are in the initial stages of beginning. Pending the council. The council's direction to us was you authorized the dollar amount for the Priority 1 projects. You gave us permission to move forward with those projects that were either being funded by someone else or, as were listed, the facility projects that were of greatest need, the roof, the police department improvements. Otherwise, we have spent a little bit of money on probably all of them in order to start getting ready, because if the council does agree to move forward with those projects, we have a pretty tight window to move forward in the current year, given the construction seasons, the time that it takes. But the majority of these projects are not completed. The vast majority are not completed.
Why don't we just go ahead and I'll raise some of the points specifically when they come up.
Alderman Nguyen.
Well, I had a couple points. One, to Alderman Rainey's point, I do remember, Ann, when we started that software lease, it was $1.6 million. It was a very major project because we were significantly behind in the types of software that we had at the city. We were in the dark ages. So there was a very big presentation, although I am like Alderman Rainey, surprised at the amount of payment. Most of the debate, or the method, most of the debate was whether it was appropriate to spend that much money on, and what were we getting in terms of what would we do? Was this a good thing to do, this software to buy? And I think it was actually quite some time ago. I mean, I'm going to guess it was like 7 or 8 years ago. Maybe I'm thinking of I'm thinking of J.D. Edwards, but I do remember a cell as well. But I think I'm going to follow up on Alderman Wilson's question. It's not my understanding, and perhaps it's someone else's understanding here, that we would be planning to pull the plug on any of these projects that we approved, the Priority 1 projects that we approved in February.
Madam Mayor, Alderman Nguyen, my understanding of our direction was to come back to you and have this discussion this evening. So if the council wanted the latitude to make adjustments among those Priority 1 projects, that you had that. So we have, again, started those major projects that we felt we had the council's agreement to move forward on. But if the council chooses to move projects around from what is in the Priority 1 category and to move things either off that list, move things up, not move forward with those projects, that's part of the discussion for this evening.
Can I follow? But my understanding is there's one project on this that is not going to be completed this year that's on the Priority 1 list, correct? That we know right now will not be
correct.
completed.
That's the James Park.
The James Park.
Right.
And actually, as we continue to look at this, we're now in month 3 of the fiscal year, there are likely other projects that may not be completed.
Right.
But again,
this won't even be started in this year. That's
correct.
Okay,
that's correct.
Right. And then the other ones that we have that were highlighted in blue, those also will not be started.
The projects
Or those are
highlighted in blue, those are projects that we anticipate starting sometime
But
this
they'll
fiscal
continue
year.
for more than 1 year.
Right. It's going to span over more than 1 year.
Okay. But everything else that's on this list, something is moving forward with respect to that project. Is that correct?
I can't tell you the stage each of those projects is in. The stages vary by project, and honestly, I don't have that detailed information.
Alderman, when members of the council, my direction to the staff was that until we had this meeting this evening, only those large projects, the roof, the police department repairs, the other additional repairs that need to be done to this building, the asbestos. We're pending this discussion because the council made it clear that while you were agreeing to a general dollar amount, you still wanted to come back and have another full discussion on the specific project. So yes, there has been some small amounts of work probably done on all of them in anticipation of the council this evening saying, okay, let's move forward or not move forward. But if you do say to move forward, every department that works on projects is anxious to spend the money and do the improvement. But you made it very clear, given the timing of the operating budget, that you wanted to have an additional discussion, so you still had that flexibility, and so that's the purpose of our meeting this evening.
Okay, just so if I could follow up on this. For example, the Ridge Avenue construction project is complete, right? And it says that we're waiting final invoicing from IDOT for $600,000. That's one that's done, right? At Lake Street, I think $1.9 million, that work's done. We're waiting on final invoicing, right? That's what I'm getting. Do we have a breakdown of the stuff that's done, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it because we're just waiting to get the bill?
We can provide you a list of those.
I think that would be somewhat helpful because...
And again, Alderman Wilson, members of the council, we anticipated that the primary focus would be the general obligation project.
Right.
Alderman Burris?
I initially had my light on because of Alderman Wilson. You're exactly right. There are things on this list that we've already finished. Because when I saw the Ridge construction, I thought we're done with the Ridge construction. What are we doing next? And it's final invoice, and it clearly said that in the materials that we were given. So I think the breakdown would be very helpful on that. And I also wanted to follow up with what Alderman Nguyen said, and if possible, if City Clerk can go back to our budget discussions, we by no means approved any of these projects on this list. We approved a dollar amount. It was very carefully worded because there were so many questions about these projects, including, number 105, library branch renovations. We're clearly not going forward with the project that we're not sure what's happening next with that. Number 12 on the 1817 Church Street chimney and roof replacement, I'm pretty sure a lot of us are going to have discussions on that as well. So just again, I think we need the exact wording that these projects absolutely have not been approved, just the dollar amount. Third, the private donation of $450,000. So there's only one donation to the animal shelter for $450,000. So it looks like there's when we say private donation of $450,000, I want to be clear it's one project. And I'd like to know, we are also saying that we'd give another $100,000 to that project. Is that that $450,000 contingent on a $100,000 match from the city? So can we do a renovation for $450,000 and take our $100,000 out? I just want to know the answer to that. And finally, for right now, we seem to have a lot of debt here. And it goes back to, I think, Alderman Rainey's initial question of, on page 2, the CIP reserves, we're still paying debt service on that. The GO debt, the unabated, we're still paying debt service on that. The unabated and the abated. So we're paying debt service on a lot of money here. So when we say CIP reserves, that is not cash that we actually have in, that's just ours, that was revenue. It was debt that was put out, and we're still paying on it.
Right,
so I think we need to be clear about that, not only among ourselves, but for the public, that this is just not money that's sitting around. So once again, concern about severe debt here. And I would like to find out the percentage of debt that Evanston has compared to other municipalities with similar budgets to ours. I think that's a really important piece of information for us to have going forward. Thank you.
Alderman Tendam.
Alderman Burris made most of the comments I'd like to make, but I think in generalizing, don't we need to know everything that we are actually contracted for at this point, and to what extent we are in that process and owe that money to at least complete the contract? And also, like Alderman Burris said, what are matches? What are we throwing away if we do say, okay, we're not using that 150? Just the consequences of eliminating something from this list. So it seems to me it's almost impossible to go ahead with this until we had that information, quite honestly.
Alderman Wilson.
Yeah, to Alderman Burris's point, because I'm going to get calls and questions about this, part of the point is this isn't all new spending. A lot of this money is already spent, and we're just having to pay the bill from this budget. So I just want to make sure that's 100% clear. And also, so we're clear, some of the projects are approved. We voted on them and said we're going to do them. So while we haven't approved the entire, capital plan as a unit, a lot of, if not most of the projects have actually been approved and authorized for the city staff to go forward with. So again, to Mark's point, we're locked into some of these things. We have contracts in place. So what I guess I'm kind of looking for is, and that's what I was trying to go through, all right, what can I cut? And the material is in here. It's a little bit laborious to go through it, and I tried to go through it as well as I could. But, there aren't very many points on which we can, it seems to me, go back and actually cut something out where we approved it, we've sent it out for bid, maybe the work started, or what have you. I think like the bike path, I think that's already out. Some of these other big ticket projects are out. Some of the little ones, James Park, $100,000, it's $100,000, but that's a pretty small dent in the, $8 million in new debt. So I guess if there's a way to parse out what we can actually do something about, as opposed to what we're already locked into, that might be more helpful. And like I said, I realize the information's in here, but it's pretty hard to extract it and get anything more than just a couple $100,000. And maybe that's just the state of affairs. Maybe that's just what we're looking at.
Alderman Rainey.
Just wanted to explain my recollection on the animal shelter renovation. Sure. We do have a contract with CARE, who is in the midst of conducting a capital campaign that will generate about $500,000, if not a little more, hopefully. And the city agreed to match that and build a huge addition onto the animal shelter. And they have taken the responsibility of doing most of, the oversight, et cetera. Also, there are many things on this list that in AMPW we've already approved contracts on. So everybody who said it would be helpful to have a couple of more columns here showing where we're committed and where we're just considering would be helpful. I know for a fact that 1817 Church Street chimney and roof replacement has been beaten to death in several different committees. We rejected it in AMPW, right? We sent it back to Economic Development. I was there. I don't recall that we ever made a determination there. And then we sent it back to Community Development Committee, which will meet tomorrow. But this should be removed, and I will move that we remove 1817 Church Street as a number one ranking. It's only $75,000, but trust me, once we open up that roof, it's going to be $175,000. And we've also got, feelers out for people to, take the building off our hands. So I can't imagine us spending $75,000. If the roof needs patching, let's patch it. But I certainly, it just can't be on here. I think that would be completely irresponsible. Is there a second?
A second. City Manager.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, let me make a process suggestion. We still have some slides to go through. I'd like Mr. Drasner to perhaps quickly go through the balance of the slides. It would be helpful to us, I think, this evening, because it's certainly we need to come back, to get a sense of the other projects. We've got the priority one projects, and we can come and talk more finally about those at a future meeting. But if there are other projects on the other lists that you believe need consideration in the current year, I think that would be helpful for staff to know, so that as we would come back at a next meeting, we know that those are in play for further discussion. If they're not, well, what I think we can do is we can peel back a lot of the additional projects that really aren't going to be funded in the current year and allow you to have more narrow discussions about those projects. So that would, Madam Mayor, would be my suggestion, to let us finish the presentation, go through if there are any 2 and 3 projects that the council would like to discuss further, and any other comments the council would have, and maybe that's the work of the evening, and then we can come back in another meeting.
I'd be happy to do that, but I have 3 aldermen who are signed up to ask questions, and then we could go ahead. Alderman Fisk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. City Manager, that was really my question, is where do we go tonight, and what can we do tonight? It seems to me that one of the alternatives would be to go line by line by line and discuss each one of these things, and that obviously would be onerous. Everyone from staff would have to stand up here and give us a basic report on the status of everything and at what committee the discussion or approval was occurring. Clearly, that's what we need to know, is where all these are and what has been done. And how quickly do you need to have an answer on what projects are going forward?
We would like to come back at the council's earliest convenience to continue this discussion. Not likely at your next regular meeting next week, but perhaps we could come back at your first meeting in June for these discussions. And I think also before the end of the evening, I'd like to get clear direction from a funding source perspective, because the council may choose to focus, in addition to the general obligation projects, with just a smaller handful of projects. If you're satisfied knowing that the motor vehicle fuel tax funds projects are moving forward and they've been previously approved, perhaps the council wishes not to have any further discussion. Certainly was my expectation that a lot of discussion would be on the general obligation projects.
Thank you. Alderman Grover, did you want to ask a question?
Just that I think the missing piece here is part of the conversation that we had during the budget process about this CIP was understanding which priority bell these projects rang to give it the #1 ranking. That is what elevated it to the top of the list. And I think we're all getting to that very same question is why is it ranked 1? Why should it be important? And some of that detail is found in the attachments, but not all of it. That would help a great deal.
Alderman Rainey.
Well, just as an example, and I really don't want to keep going over this, but the police firing range, almost $500,000 is in here. Isn't that finished? And if not,
it's underway.
No, but City Manager, long before you came here, we were voting money for this project. So we must have spent at least $400,000 by now on it.
And I don't have a number. Mr. Gaynor's here. The Chief Eddington's here.
The project, as Alderman Rainey has verbalized, has been going on for quite a while. However, we have not spent nearly that type of money. We have done lead abatement, and we have done engineering on the project. And we are now going to do the heating and cooling, which is about half the budget that you just mentioned. The balance of that budget then will be spent on the bullet trap. The chief has gone through the engineering drawings. He's approved this. At one time, this project was well up over $1 million, and it has been reduced down considerably to do the bare minimums to make it functional.
Thank you. Alderman Rainey, does that answer your question?
I want to know how much you spent on it. But I understand you don't.
Mr. Gaynor, do you have a number, an approximate number?
I'm sorry. I
An
didn't
approximate number on what's been spent on this project?
I don't have it in front of me, no.
Could you give a ballpark?
I'll get something that's accurate. I'd hate to
Thank you.
To give you a number.
Thank you. All right. Go ahead, Mr. Drasner.
Moving on. Parks, Forestry, and Recreation. $1.1 million for the Lakefront Master Plan. Brummel Richmond Park, $295,000. Twiggs Park, $220,000, and the park we just discussed that will be delayed at least this year, James Park, for $100,000. Public Works, Lake Street LAPP for $650,000, and I am actually showing you the breakdown between our share and the grant portion. The grant portion is almost $1.3 million. Traffic signal upgrades, $741,000. Traffic signal maintenance, $150,000. Additional signal upgrades, I'm not quite sure why those are separate there, but I'll definitely look into that for $120,000. And the 50/50 sidewalk program for $100,000. Okay, these are all non-grant funded water and sewer projects. Water main installation, approximately $3.3 million. And I just want to mention that Mr. Stonebeck did an excellent job giving me approximate start dates on his projects. So this one is anticipated to start June of this year. Filter roof rehab for $1.7 million. And this one is also a June start date for the design and December for construction. The SCADA Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition System, $950,000. And this one is expected to start later in the year, approximately October. And sewer repairs on various street improvements, $375,000. Okay, these projects are all funded through our reserves, our prior bond issues, the street resurfacing, paving, Dodge at Dempster, the Ridge Avenue construction, and the bridge rehab program. And the sum of all those, the total reserve funding was about $3.5 million. And this is a breakdown of what makes the majority of that up. Okay, these are the projects that were not adopted last February. These are the priority 2 and 3 projects. So you can see for priority 2, it was approximately $700,000, and priority 3, about $3 million. The largest project under the priority 3 category was the fire vehicle replacement for about $1.7 million. Okay, these projects that were originally budgeted in the current fiscal year that were not adopted, the priority 2 and 3s, we automatically moved those over to the following fiscal year. So that would be FY 11-12. So when we start talking about next year's CIP, this will probably be a central focus of the discussion. And, part of the discussion for tonight will be whether or not you might want to swap some of the projects, the priority 1 projects that haven't been started yet, with any of these 2 or 3 projects. Okay, there were a couple of revisions to some water and sewer projects, and this slide is showing you the before and after. The per adopted budget column is the original budget, the budget that was adopted, and the final column is the revised amounts. So you can see there's a couple of projects where we actually added expense, and there were some that we reduced. And if you want additional detail on any of these, Mr. Stonebeck is here, and he can go into more detail for you. Okay, so again, we're here to discuss whether or not you might want to swap any of the higher priority projects or lower priority for a priority 1 project, and also to pinpoint the amount of debt that we're going to issue. And the capital project, the CIP is only part of the anticipated debt issuance. We also want to issue debt to save on interest costs for the ERI liability through IMRF. And that sums up the presentation, and we're available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dresner. Does anyone have any more questions? City Manager?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, we struggled as to how to come to you this evening and present. I think in many communities, the capital improvement program is a rolling process, and so the increment of adopting new projects is fairly straightforward. As I've mentioned to the council on several occasions, given the high level of debt that we do have, that system really was not working, and so we're almost here starting from scratch, but really aren't starting from scratch because the train continues to move and we continue to do projects. My hope would be that before we leave this evening, the council could provide some direction on a couple of matters. One, really the last piece, if there are projects that clearly you have looked at that are in the priority 2 and 3 categories that you feel deserve additional scrutiny from the council, that would be very helpful to know. Secondly, it would be helpful to know what level of additional detail you would like to go into for the non-general fund projects, so things that are either being paid for by a grant, that are being paid for by tax increment, which are being paid from water and sewer funds, or others outside funds. Because I think certainly from a staff's perspective, when you look at the amount of debt that's general obligation debt, and my recommendation to the council would be to focus primarily on that, because I think that those are opportunities, again, for projects that are either they're not started or not very far underway, that if the council chooses not to move forward with, there could potentially be cost savings. So again, we have struggled with the best way to do this. I've heard from all of you clearly that you wanted additional control over how we're spending capital dollars, and it's difficult to ascertain the best process, again, when you're trying to reconfigure the process while still trying to move the community forward and to invest needed dollars into important infrastructure. So, Madam Mayor, certainly would appreciate the council's discussion on those points so we can have additional direction for future meetings.
I think you have some discussion coming up. Alderman Nguyen?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I think, Mr. City Manager, that at least my understanding or my thoughts back in February were that we were only looking at priority 1 projects, projects that answered one of those 4, the questions in one of those 4 categories, and that anything that fell outside of that was not something that we would consider during this year because of the extreme budget situation that we were under. So from my standpoint, that unless it was something that met one of those questions, which were, its essentialness, that it was something that we were just going to have to defer. Then I think with respect to the issues on the geodebt, on the unabated geodebt projects, I think that is important to look at, but as we've just said, we need a lot more information about the status of those. I mean, I look at one of these, the traffic signal updates on Chicago Avenue. That's a project that's been going on for 3 or 4 years, and 4 or 5 years. We probably bid on that 3 times before we got the federal grant money for that. Then this is our match. The engineering has been done on that, and this is the implementation. So I think that those are the types of things that we need all in one place, that we can understand that here are the things that we have actually not started, here are the things that are ongoing, and the percentage of where they are. So, I mean, I don't want to waste money by pulling the plug on something where we have moved forward on it 40%. That we're then going to have to repeat this later on. So that would be the information that I would need. I certainly don't think that we should borrow any more than is absolutely essential for us to keep the city moving this year. I mean, and with respect to the issue of swapping out this James Park renovation. I came here tonight thinking, why are we even looking to spend this additional $100,000? Why don't we just not spend it? Since there isn't another project that jumps up off priority 2 or 3 list to me that would answer these questions.
Thank you. Alderman Wilson.
I agree. I don't want to move anything from 2 or 3 up to the priority 1 category. I don't want to swap the James Park money. And I do want to bring I want to bring this debt number down to the smallest possible point. So as far as the information that I'm looking to see, what's under contract? I don't want to default on something and end up having to pay the contractor for something we don't do. So what's under contract? What's the status of the work? And which items is it possible to either defer on or do something else on? And just to include, the format's fine, item by item. But this, it doesn't have that level of detail. I can't see where exactly it's at. For the ones that are done, like I mentioned, it says it's completed. Okay, we're going to get a bill for that. There's nothing we can do about that. But which ones do we actually have some room on so we can bring that debt number down to the bare minimum?
Madam Mayor, may I add?
Sure.
The other issue I was considering when I looked at all of this is a risk assessment. I know that we're trying to bring our risk numbers under control. So what I was looking at in terms of this list, in terms of the money that's spent, is where we spend any of this money that we reduce our liability or our risk in any way, because that's essentially a revenue producer by reducing our risk.
Thank you. Alderman Fisk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have 2 questions on item number 2 and number 3 projects that look like repairs to me, and I'd like a comment from staff on them. One is the lagoon suction pit replacement, which is ranking 3, and the library chiller replacement, which ranks 2.
Ms. Johns is here, can speak to the chiller. Mr. Gaynor can speak to the lagoon, if you could come up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, City Council. The issue with the chiller at the library is that it's working at about 25% capacity. And since I'm not an engineer, let me just read you the information. 2 200-ton, 30 GB carrier chillers were installed when the main library was built in 1994. These existing chillers have a rated lifespan, useful lifespan of 15 to 18 years. The units have worked hard for 16 years, and since they are located outside, they're subject to extreme temperature, and this impacts their useful life. Maintenance is becoming more expensive, and there have been many problems with the equipment in the past year. For example, the evaporator bundle on Circuit A of the North Chiller has failed, resulting in a loss of 25% of cooling capacity. It is cost prohibitive to replace this one of 4 evaporator bundles. When additional failures occur, it will not be cost effective to repair the equipment to the manufacturer's specifications due to the years of operating service. The chillers use R22 refrigerant, and no more equipment is being made that uses this refrigerant. It is being phased out for environmental reasons. Replacement of the chillers will have a long lead time. An engineering firm would be hired to develop equipment specs, including sizing the equipment for the building and analysis of load requirements. Equipment could be ordered by the City of Evanston and assigned to the installer. This was done at Fire Station 2. This can shorten the project timeline and lower the cost of the equipment. The equipment must be installed in good weather when it's not needed, preferably, either spring or fall. Therefore, spring 2011 would be recommended after the design work would be completed. New equipment would be much more energy efficient and ensure the comfort of the library and for visitors. In terms of the impact, over 150,000 people came to the main library in June, July, and August of 2009.
And Mr. Gaynor can speak to the lagoon.
So could we just ask a question about, so the plan is 2011, the plan is to replace the chiller. Is that right?
2012.
2012.
We would come back to the council with that
In
for next
engineering.
year's budget consideration.
But I mean, that is the plan anyway. I mean, it's not an emergency replacement at this time.
We don't believe so, but we
Okay,
believe
that's-
we're at a critical stage, and we would want to move forward. And again, we would, pending the council's approval of next year's budget.
Right, okay, that's all I wanted to know.
I would just add to that, Mr. City Manager, that if we could do the design work between now and next year, which would be approximately, I think the memo said about $30,000, then we would make the decision whether we need to go ahead and actually do the installation or whether we can put it off again. But it's going to take some time to do the actual engineering and design work, which puts us several months behind once this project would be approved for 2011-12. The suction pit at the Lagoon Building is very small, and it's dangerous for when our employees have to go in and make repairs. We've looked at trying to do this for the last several years. It's never happened. We put it on to this year to see if we could get it approved. It is something that we can put off. We just have to make sure we are extra careful with our employees when they're in the pit working for repairs.
Alderman Nguyen, that was your concern.
No, well, partly, but Doug, I have to say, I don't know what the suction pit is or does or where it is.
It's about halfway between the north and south on the west side. Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's that too.
That's grotto's another man's suction pit, I guess.
It filters the water. It's really primarily the main functioning mechanics for the lagoon.
Alderman Fisk, does that answer your
thank
question?
you very much.
Alderman Rainey, you're next.
Do you turn it on and off? It's mechanical. Can it be turned on and off?
It is mechanical. We do turn it on and off. However, we do have it on a timer for, in most cases, except when we have a function like the concert where the actual spray of the fountain exceeds the level of the music. So sometimes we turn that off.
But when we put a person in the lagoon, don't we turn it off?
They're not in the lagoon. The suction pit is just to the west of the lagoon.
But you're saying it's dangerous for our employees.
Yes, it is.
What makes it dangerous? I'm trying to understand.
It's a very small area for an employee to work in by themselves. We need to excavate it out and make it a larger area.
That's very important.
For the maintenance of that facility.
I've heard Janad talk about our excavation techniques over the years, and he has claimed that they are not that safe. So, all right, I understand. But it's not an emergency at this time. You've got to.
Well, we've lived with it for the last blank number of years, so we'll live with it for another year.
So we've learned how to deal with it. Anyway?
Yeah, you're
okay. I have a question about the last page.
What?
Council authorization for debt issuance to cover early retirement incentive IMRF liability. I'm astonished at that. I'm wondering over time and in the past when the previous city manager instituted the early retirement incentive program, did we issue bonds to cover that?
Mr. Lyons can speak to this.
Well, but Mr. City Manager, I'm really asking you for your opinion on the efficacy of doing something like that.
Madam Mayor, Alderman Rainey, this was something that was discussed as part of the operating budget as one of our cost-saving measures was to refinance that debt. And so I believe Mr. Lyons' plan as the city treasurer was, since we were moving forward with a debt issuance for capital, that we would also use that debt issuance to refinance the IMRF note. Is that correct, Mr. Lyons?
Yes, Mr. Manager, Madam Mayor, members of council. This is completely different than a previously viewed look at issuing pension obligation bonds for police and fire. In that case, you are looking at replacing a variable debt, the pension obligation that could change based on actuarial assumptions, with a fixed debt, borrowing money and sticking it in the bank and trying to make money on the arbitrage for that. This is totally different. Presently, when we did the early retirement initiative, we incurred approximately $9 million in early retirement debt, and that reflected the 5 years of pension purchased for those early retirements. That debt is being amortized on the city over 10 years at 7.5%. So it is no different than a 7.5% note that we are paying. When we issue our own debt, we are at 4 to 5%, and what's in the budget is to say we should issue our own debt. It's still a fixed obligation of the city. About the only thing that can change that is if one of those early retirees no longer had the obligation. That would be an early mortality situation. Not likely, and we can certainly adjust to it, but that's where we're talking about the savings. And on an annual basis, we're talking about $300,000 a year. We only put it in for $150,000 because we thought we would only get to it at about halfway through the year is when we would pull the trigger.
When was the first time we did this for the early retirement? Did we do it as it was being proposed?
No, this is a one-time deal. We take all $9 million of unfunded liability, buy it out at a lower interest. It's not unlike when we 2 Novembers ago when we refunded general obligation debt with newer debt at lower interest rates. It's just
Are there cons to doing this?
One of the things, as I said, is that there could be the issue of a major swing in the population of the 69 people who took the early retirement incentive, that all of a sudden that debt wouldn't be there. Highly unlikely. And if we had something out of a bell curve, not in that range, that something unfortunate happened, our IMRF rate would adjust. So when we pay, right now we're paying an IMRF rate at 12%, up from 8%. That's for every IMRF salary that we have. We pay, if it's $1, we pay 12 cents. The idea is to knock about a third of that. It's a 4% amount. I'm sorry for pulling up so many numbers, but the idea is to knock about $150,000 to $300,000 annually off of our IMRF interest payments for the early retirement incentive.
Alderman Rainey, does that finish your questions? Alderman Grover.
It's been so long since I took the line, and I think my question had to do with James Park and why it was a priority 1 ranked project and is now no longer, and where is its ranking, and why was it demoted?
Mr. Gaynor?
The requested appropriation of $100,000 was split on 2 different projects at James Park. The biggest project was replacing a water pump in order to be able to irrigate all the fields in a reasonable amount of time. We are not able to do that currently, as we have added many more sodded areas, the soccer fields and all the baseball fields. So the idea was to add a pump and a little bit of irrigation in order to be able to accommodate the watering cycle that we need to do. Right now, I think in order to get it all done, 4 days. I think 4 days, and we need to cut that back. If you've been out to James Park during the end of July and part of August, the grasses are turning yellow. The other part of that, the smaller amount, was for settling of the foundation of the field house. A portion of that building has settled, and we need to make some repairs there. This will be the second time that I'm aware of in the last 12 years that we have had settling occur. One of the corners of that building was settling, and that building was put in with a foundation with piers. One of the piers failed. We did that work several years ago, and now we're finding, again, some settling occur.
And these are both projects that can be delayed then, if we're pulling them
Well,
off the...
we know what the consequences are, but we also know the dire straits of our budget, and so we decided that we'd put it off. I don't believe the folks that are using the fields out there will be real happy, but it's a decision we have to make when we look at the overall. And it was also in our discussions that possibly when we talked about either eliminating that $100,000 or doing some swaps, that maybe some of that could be used to assist the library project, at least in the fundamental stages of design or something.
Alderman Holmes?
City Manager, can you remind me of the replacement of the fire truck in terms of the priority for when it should be or when that replacement should take place, since it's a 3? I know we got the $500,000 one, but this is $1.6 million. So is this? I know it's a different truck. I
Yes,
understand that, but what I'm saying is.
And I still have a fire chief for 2 more weeks, so I'll ask him to come up and speak to this as well. But this would be the ladder truck that we were looking to purchase. We have notified the council. We fortunately have received the largest grant for the aid for firefighters in the state of Illinois to assist with this project. And now that not Mr. Burkowski, Chief Burkowski is at the podium, I'll let him finish the story.
Good evening. The priority 3 was for a ladder truck and a replacement engine. The engine was taken care of this year, so that was actually the plan was to use it. Right now we have 2 ladder trucks that were both purchased in 1990, about 6 months apart due to both of the ladder trucks at that time just basically falling apart. So the plan was to use a 1.6, one to buy a truck, the other one to refurbish one of the current trucks so we can separate the trucks by about 10 years. So we're never in the same situation needing to purchase 2 aerial trucks at the same time. The grant has helped out tremendously with the $600,000, so which we are now in the process of writing a spec to purchase a new aerial truck and hopefully still refurbish one to create that separation between the 2 aerial trucks.
So is there time on the grant, though? I mean, should this be moved up, though, in order to get the grant? I guess that's what I'm asking.
I'm going to turn it to our Assistant City Manager.
This hadn't been changed from a previous revision of the CIP, so the new format should show $600,000 priority 1 and $600,000 from grant. So the $600,000 would be a GO debt this year, and $600,000 from the grant. We did not expect to receive the grant through many of our iterations of the CIP, but given that we have 50% of it funded, this and the other reason I would not recommend many of our vehicles for the utilization of general obligation funding, but the life cycle of the articulated ladder trucks is 20 years, and that's our bond cycle. So issuing debt for that is appropriate, and we're issuing half the debt for the vehicle.
Oh, I did want to mention that thank you notes for the grant would be a great idea.
I'm sorry.
Thank you notes for the grant would be a great idea to Senator Durbin and Congresswoman Schakowsky.
I understand that, but I don't understand. I mean, I don't understand the answer.
The answer is that we need to update the report. The $1.6 million referred to information prior to the grant. So it should be updated to reflect $600,000 of priority 1 funding from general obligation debt and $600,000 from grant funding for a purchase of a vehicle in the next year. And the reason that it should be priority 1 is that we get discounts anywhere from 3 to 5% if we fund in advance, and we're only earning 0.2 to 0.5%. So as long as we can get the funding up front, which it's my understanding we can, Chief. We can get once we commit our funds, we can have their funds as well.
Yes, we get 25%.
So then really the answer to my question is just what I asked. Then this should be moved up to priority 1.
Correct, Alderman Holmes.
Okay.
And Alderman Holmes, what we've tried to do is we've tried to bring you what you saw in February.
Right, okay.
Had there been a fully adopted budget, this would in essence be a change because of a change of circumstance.
Okay. All right.
Alderman Rainey.
What about the repair of the other ladder?
That is, the question, Mr. Lyons, was the repair of the additional ladder truck, and I don't know that we've identified funds for that in the current fiscal year.
We would have that. That would remain as a 2 or a 3. The idea still would be to refurbish that ladder truck at somewhere between $300,000 and $700,000. It sounds kind of odd to say that's for a refurbishment, but you get somewhere between 7 and 10 more years of life out of the vehicle. So, but we just didn't see how it would fit in this tight year to have that ladder truck. So if both of them pass the tests for their ladders, then you end up, you'd say you'd have a great vehicle to sell. Unfortunately, one of the things that's a part of the grant is we may not sell that ladder truck. The one that we replace as a part of the grant, we may not sell in the continental United States or in the North American continent. So we either have to scrap it or sell it overseas.
I'll bet Belize could use a ladder truck.
That, you are not the first to recommend that, unfortunately, Alderman.
But I don't think, do they have tall buildings? No. Yes, he.
Okay, Alderman Nguyen, and then Alderman Tendem.
Yes, Madam Mayor. Well, given what we just, the changed circumstances that we just heard about with respect to this, I'd like to know if there are any other issues where we have a change of circumstance that would perhaps make us consider a priority 2 or priority 3 a priority 1. So that would be additional information that we'd like to know. And also, thinking about the library chiller replacement, I recognize that maybe we'll have a cool summer and it'll be okay. But if there are pieces of this that we can, priority 2 or 3, that make sense to begin to spend some money on, I'd like to understand that better as well. We don't want to have a catastrophic failure, obviously, and I don't think we will in the library, but if there's something that we can do now, spending a small amount, that then allows a much faster replacement in the out years, let's understand that too.
Alderman Tendem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A couple things that go to what Alderman Nguyen had said a little earlier about liabilities. And I noticed that typically I think that the neighborhood traffic calming program has usually requested about $50,000 a year, which I think has always been a little underfunded or much underfunded and significantly underfunded in a time when we are being more aware of our liabilities. There are several projects in the 6th Ward that I've asked engineering to address, and they have started studies of problems I think are significant problems in the sense that the 6th Ward is becoming more populated with younger people, children. Schools are capacity, and there's a lot more traffic coming through the neighborhood because of the increased business at the hospitals, universities, and places. So I think that that's not a priority 2 or 3, but it seems to be a priority 1 that could be expanded and help with some of our liability concerns and also contribute to some of the neighborhoods that badly need that assistance. Another thing I'm wondering about the alley paving program we've allocated, not that it's a general obligation debt, but are people stepping up to pave their alleys these days given the economy? Are people taking advantage of this program?
Hi, good evening. Suzette Robinson, Director of Public Works. We have seen a decline in the number of requests per petitions and the number of petitions returned. We are down to 3 alleys for this year, and we have 2 petitions that are out for next year.
I know we spoke once briefly about maybe for some situations that are particularly bad with flooding and, again, liabilities, maybe looking at changing the formula, if that's possible, in certain situations where we could contribute more, if we felt it would sort of relieve some of the accident or flooding in these alleys. And I'm also curious to see if the 50/50 sidewalk program is also, are we getting a response on that? Because that does come from the general obligation debts.
Oh, yes, we have more than enough.
We maxed out?
Yes.
Okay, because I could use some help there. Okay. My main curiosity is trying to increase some of the traffic calming, especially with regard to a crosswalk on Central Street at Bend Park. So that's something that I'd like the manager and staff to consider, at least for the 6th Ward. Thank you.
Alderman Fisk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Gaynor, can I ask you one other question about the library chiller replacement? Can you give me an idea of what the cost for the design and engineering for that might be?
$30,000.
Is it $30,000? Okay.
As a rule of thumb, we budget about 10% of what the total project would be. It's estimated the project would be $300,000, and that's why I think I mentioned $30,000
okay.
Would be the number.
Okay. And are we able to, Ms. Johns, maintain optimal temperature in the library, do you think, on the hottest days without this repair?
Right now, we're only at 25%. So, given a really hot day, we notice it a bit. Right now, just a touch.
And there are no windows to open. Right, right, okay. Thanks.
Alderman Burris.
The West Evanston planning, there's 2 different ones under some funding from tax increment financing for $80,000, and then there's another item under the GO debt unabated for $50,000. And I was just wondering why that couldn't come out of the Economic Development Fund. It seems to make sense that we're talking about economic development for the West Side instead of paying for it through something we're going to have to pay interest on when we have money in the economic development budget. It's just maybe something to look at in that regard as we're trying to reduce our debt load. Also, buying furniture at $50,000, once again, on a credit card, it seems a little silly to me. And also buying windows for the fire station at $65,000 on a credit card, which is basically what I consider going out and borrowing money and then paying it back. So for things that, I would agree with Alderman Nguyen on things that we have to do that are safety related that we must do. I understand why we may buy it on a credit card, but other things we might not want to.
Alderman Rainey.
We might have already approved the windows. Okay. I think so. That doesn't mean that we have to pay it out of here. I'm sitting here very curious about the effort of members of the council to spend money that we're being given an opportunity to eliminate from this year's capital plan. And I would encourage us to just go with the number 1 projects. I'm feeling that we're being tag-teamed out here with this chiller thing. We'll give up James Park if you do the engineering for the chiller, which is a number 2, which can very easily be done next year. And I just don't understand why we have an aversion to not spending this $100,000 if we can not spend it. So let's not spend it. Let's give that some thought.
Thank you, Alderman Rainey. Seeing no further lights, City Manager, do you think you have the direction you need?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, what I'd like to do then is I'd like to come back with based on the comments we heard this evening, and also trying to take reality, as we've talked about, for example, the fire engine purchases, and alter the priority one list slightly, go back through, come up with a new sheet for you for those projects that are underway, so that there's a clear understanding of how much money has already been committed in prior years to projects, and ask you at your next meeting then to consider a revised priority one list and have that be then the capital budget for fiscal year 2010-2011. If there are opportunities for us to recommend to you any project priority one projects that we feel are not going to be able to go forward, that would then allow us to lower the amount of general obligation debt issued, we would come back with those recommendations and basically put this in a package for you for your final consideration so we can move forward. That would be, Madam Mayor, my recommendation, if that's agreeable with the council.
Seeing no lights, I assume that means agreement. So we could have a motion to adjourn. City Clerk?
Alderman Holmes. Aye. Alderman Tindem. Aye. Alderman Grover. Aye. Alderman Rainey. Aye. Alderman Burris. Aye. Alderman Fisk. Aye. Alderman Nguyen. Alderman Wilson.
Aye.
8-0. 8-0, we are adjourned.
Join the press, man? Join the working press?
Are we to look or not?
Give our profile.